intertextual cardboard experience.
Hello and welcome to Intertextual Cardboard Experience, where we're excited to hang out seaside and watch the high tide with our awesome 30-second guest, Marceline Leiman. How are you doing today, Marceline?
Hi Ryan, thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm doing great today. Just poured myself some tea, and I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I actually have like a tea myself and water. I'm going to be overhydrated for this conversation. I'm ready to go.
What kind of tea do you prefer to drink? I'm drinking a green tea right now,
Okay, I
specifically a Genmai cha. If you're into specific teas.
ooh, I when it comes to my tea, I wind up being probably like too basic, and I probably should start doing the loose teas. I know that, but I always do just like the traditional medicinals.
Oh,
So
what is that?
it's just like a brand. So kind of like those. I'm big into ones that are like throat teas or respiratory teas. I don't know what's in them.
Uh-huh. Like I see. I've totally had teas like that too, where it's like, oh, if my stomach is hurting, this one is supposed to be good for that. But I don't really know if that's actually helping. It just seems like it would be nice.
Yeah, this one apparently has herbs like slippery elm, marshmallow root, and licorice. So,
Hmm.
so yeah,
So a
I'm,
lot of herbs.
yeah.
Nice.
But sorry, what was the type that you said you were drinking again specifically?
It's called Genmai cha. It's a green tea that, depending on the kind of Genmai cha you have, could be mixed with rice or popcorn, I've seen.
Hmm.
And it was introduced to me in college. And I've had conversations with other tea lovers, and some people call it like a grandma tea because it's like very, I guess, like, mm, I don't know, weedy. I don't know how to describe it. But I my partner really loves it. So we've been continuing to get it. But I think right now my favorite tea might be like sencha or hoji cha. I've been really enjoying those this winter.
Awesome. And then do you do all the kind of like loose leaf concoctions? Are you making these
Oh,
all?
I don't concoct. I just get like I'll just get a sencha from my
Okay.
like local Asian market, and
Oh,
we'll just like brew that loose leaf.
okay.
We have like a small teapot that I've had since college that has chips on it. I'm like looking at it right now, but it's just like, you know, uh it's it's a teapot that works for, and it fills enough tea for two people very comfortably. So it's I've been thinking about my teapot and thinking about like how um it's sad to think about letting it go one day. It's because it just reminds me of being in college and barely knowing anything about tea. Um, and also it was a gift from a high school friend at the time, and it makes me think of him too.
Oh, that's super sweet. I mean, I hope it's able to, kind of just hang on and be there with you as long as possible then.
Yeah, I mean, right now, the teapot itself is fine, but the actual like mesh strainer is starting to fall apart, which is, for having had it for like almost a decade now, is pretty impressive.
Yeah. I think I I definitely need to start doing the loose leaf and the strainer. I've said that I need to just step my tea game up, and I feel like it's something I can do, but I just haven't. I'm boring. So
I definitely recommend it. I feel like it. Do you make coffee at home?
yes.
So I feel like it's the same kind of like cool mental space you can get into when you make coffee. How do you make coffee at home?
Oh, well, this is another one where I've been boring. On the whole, I've just been brewing the big pots, but I've done uh different pour over methods, and then
Hmm.
and then a little bit of French press in the past too.
We live in New York, so we have like a small New York City apartment. And so we only do French press. We don't have space for like a dedicated coffee machine. Um, so when we do want to make coffee, we 100% of the time go French press, or we'll get coffee in the neighborhood somewhere.
Nice. Yeah. Well, yeah, like you said, it kind of does like tap into do that different space. So I'll again, this is one of the things that I have on my to-do list, or I should do this, and I'll just go for it. I'll
Go for
take
it.
I'll take that plunge, get myself a
Yeah.
good
Grab the
uh,
reins of my brain, because if you leave me alone for too long, I will take control of this conversation and it will go in places that are not about board games.
Oh, well, no, honestly, that's perfect. That's what this podcast is about. It's bringing in like different tech, so it could be about
Right.
video games, real life. I don't, I love that. I'm saying that I personally just need to do better with my tea.
Oh yeah, but go ahead, take the reign.
Oh, okay. Well, nonetheless, before we kind of get into some of the board game related things, I just want to give a little bit of a preface to listeners. And, the first part of that is that I've listened to your interview on the Beyond Altair podcast a couple of times now. So some of the thoughts here kind of link to, thoughts and questions I had after listening to that. And just in general, if anybody here is somehow listening to this without listening to that, I would highly recommend going to check out that interview. And the second part of this is that this is kind of cool because now this will be the second episode in a row where I've actually been able to meet the guests in person and before chatting, and we met briefly at the PAX Unplugged Indie Game Night Market just this past December. And some of the thoughts in this conversation will be linked to that event, and then obviously High
Right.
Tide and other things that you're thinking about there. So just I'm really excited for this conversation. That's my preface.
Yeah. I feel like because you were working with Eric, right?
Yes, Eric came to just help with my table. Eric was one of the people that I'd involved in like workshopping the rule book with as well too. But yeah, I was with Eric there. It
Yeah.
was really cool.
Yeah, I think the whole space and the vibe was really great because we were all sort of leaning into the very like handmade, handcrafted nature of the thing and just like being scrappy. And I feel like too much of board games are not scrappy looking or feeling enough to feel like real, you know? Like
Hmm.
sometimes products are just a little too shiny, like a little too glitzy to feel like they were made by a person. So I feel like in a way, even though not to call any particular company out specifically, but I think of there are companies who call themselves small, who are quite literally like 6, 9 man teams, right? I would call that small,
Hmm.
but they're able to produce such impressive work that it doesn't quite register to the mass as being small. Whereas with our work at the Indie Game Night Market at PAX Unplugged this past December, we sort of had the opportunity to like unmask our own game design processes, right? Because we just by necessity, by scale, cannot afford to make something that looks professional. Obviously, like some people were able to like make really beautiful looking objects, but some of us like I didn't even have like my well, first I want to call yours out because yours was really interesting. Your game was called Oversized Sandwich.
Yes.
So Oversized Sandwich came in a like literal sandwich, clear sandwich bag, and you gave me a sticker to write my own name on. And I feel like your project in particular was like very charming of the medium we were working in, which is like I don't boxes are expensive, like notoriously expensive. Um, and like, how to contain the thing along with the rules, along with the pieces. You might have precious materials that you don't want to get nicked, like cards and stuff. Um, so like how do you like make a thing that is like being sold in a marketplace that won't seem like low quality to somebody, that seems like charming or whimsical. I think your game in particular had a lot of whimsy in that way because you're saying this is a game about making a sandwich, and here I'm gonna give it to you in a lunch bag. I thought that was really clever way of sort of like setting someone up for um, sort of the world of the game that you're creating. I thought that was really cute.
I I really appreciate that, and yeah, just kind of not don't need to hijack that thought too much, but I with the like you said, I mean, really interesting thoughts about like design and the product that people are getting, and what can feel like it is perhaps distilled to kind of fall into something that doesn't necessarily feel that distances itself from the creator a little bit, and how the indie games market was working to really link the one to one. But yeah, I don't know. I just had some fears about even transporting it. So, and I've been kind of all over the place with my life and planning lately. So I'm throwing, like, I had all the games in a box, just like the decks of cards. So I was constructing them later just so they didn't get, beat up or nicked in the process. And yeah, I don't know. That was a whole thing, but it just added to my overall experience with it, and I'm glad that it was able to get me to the market at that point in time with the games, and ready for everybody there to like sign them and pick out their stickers and all that. It was just fun.
Yeah, and like for me, I don't know if I've shared this story necessarily on audio, but the funny thing about my project is like I also was very concerned about this question of like transportation and containment of like my game. Like, so my game has pieces. My game was called High Tide at the market. It was made up of 19 wooden hexagons that I spray painted and stamped with different like shells, shell shapes with an ink stamp, and then lacquered to make sure that it doesn't kind of like bleed as you start to use it and kind of sweat on your with your hands onto it. Um, so and not to mention I doubles. This was a choice which I really didn't have to make, but I felt like for myself I needed to. I stamped both sides of each tile. So 19 times 2, that's 28. Is that 38? I don't know. I'm not great at math. 38 times for each set.
Yeah.
Um, and when you multiply that by how many sets I brought, I think I brought something close to 20. It is quite a lot of work to put that many sets together. Um, but when the problem arose of like, okay, I have these wooden pieces. Oh, I could put them in a bag because like I could just get these like little mesh party favor bags for cheap and put like some scoring tokens in them. I have like some glass beads in my work studio. And um, the last thing was like the rule book. It's like how the rule book, if I put it in this bag with these like wooden pieces, it's going to get like crunched up and bent and stuff. And so that was really my concern. Like I'm giving someone this thing, and like maybe I didn't have to think about it too deeply, but I just felt like it was wrong to give somebody a thing that it's like feels like it's already damaged in a way. Like I want to give you this like tiny little rules, but I don't want it to be like bent and creased as soon as I sell it to you. Um, and so I happened to, before venturing on this project, uh, in my studio is like in Queens, and so I was like just tossing some trash one day when in the recycling bin I saw like quite literally tens of 20s of these small cardboard boxes just in the bin, untarnished, just completely unopened. And I was like, why are all these boxes that clearly have things in them tossed in the recycling. So I just like I've never dumpster dived in my entire life. I've never had the curiosity to look through someone else's garbage, but I just was like piqued in this instant. I reached into the recycling. I pulled out one of the boxes, um, and I opened it, and inside was an unused thermostat.
Hmm.
And I came to realize after I kept opening them, all of these were unused thermostat. And I'm curious if like maybe the building like had purchased all of these thermostats and had intended to implement them, but then just never did. I have no clue what the story of these thermostats could have been. And I posted the thermostat story on my Blue Sky, and immediately like Unpub is like, oh, you got to collect those so we can like make thermostat games at the next like Unpub event. And then of course the next time I went to go check if the thermostats were still in there, the thermostats were gone. But I did manage to scurry away with like maybe, I don't know, I want to say like 80 of the boxes that these thermostats came in. So I still have excess boxes, these tiny little boxes that I used for high tide, at my studio, and they're honestly the perfect size for just like putting a little card based or tile based prototype into. And I'm like, because I got it for free, I can literally just hand it to a publisher and not feel bad about losing it, you know?
Yeah.
So it was just very apropos to like come upon these boxes and for them to not be disgusting. They were actually very clean, very like they were, like I said, untarnished. And so the question was just like, can I use these boxes in a way that people will feel like is even remotely professional? Um, so what I did was I'm just like I'm going over my shelf right now, taking up a coffee. And so what I ended up doing was I stamped the top of the box with like one of the stamps I used for the hex pieces. And then after like initially I was just going to do that and thought like, oh man, I wish I had like a nice way to like put the title of the game on there because I'm not just going to like write it with my handwriting. I have like awful handwriting. Um, my handwriting has been like Dr. Chicken Scratch since I was like able to write. So it just has never gotten better. So I decided to invest in like stickers for the boxes, that I would just stick on the side of the box, which I kind of had to do anyway because each box had a sticker already on it that clearly stated that it was like a thermostat box. So I was like, okay, I just need to put a sticker over this thermostat sticker so that it looks at least okay to someone who will purchase it. Um, so yeah, like all those considerations went into a simple problem of like, oh man, I don't want this piece of paper with the rules on it to get creased.
That that first off, that's hilarious, and that's definitely falls into like that the perfect example of another one person's trash is another person's treasure type of deal, and just the timing and kind of serendipitous nature of that. That's hilarious. And now, yeah, I don't know. I wonder how many people uh with your those copies of the indie game night market high tides know that there's another sticker hanging out underneath the title.
I mean, I could tempt them to try to remove the sticker and prove to them that these are in fact thermostat boxes, but then the sticker would be ruined. So it's up to you.
Oh,
Your move.
yeah, no, it's just yeah, more of a curiosity. How many people? No, it's you have a thermostat line of games now
Oh yeah.
to go with. But interest I actually had a question here too that was, specifically about the stamps that you put for the tiles. How you kind of like ran through it in the overview, but how would you like describe the stamp making? Did you say they were shells themselves, or did you do something that kind of created them to be like shells?
So, unfortunately, I did not end up making the stamps that I finally used for the project. I did attempt to learn how to make stamps, and I kind of showed some of that process on my Blue Sky.
Hmm.
But every attempt I made was just below the quality that in my mind I felt like I would be comfortable selling to somebody. So, but it was really fun to learn. And I later learned that Max Seidman was inspired by that process of like learning how to make stamps to then stamp his own game that came to the market, Skyline.
Hmm.
He put stamps on like the outside of the box with the game's title and stuff. And he said that that was his first time also doing it, which was really cool. But I'm definitely not a stamp maker, at least not a good one. So I ended up finding some stamps on Etsy that I was really happy with. One stamp is a starfish, another one is more of like a clam, and another one is like a beach comb, I think it's called. Um, and I just love the style of this artist. It just feels like a cross cut of of the shell itself. And on her description, maybe I'll send you the link because right now I don't remember what the actual Etsy creator's name was.
Yeah.
So you could put it in the description. But uh, she actually used the actual like shells to create these stamps. So I would definitely look into her. Um, but yeah, my own stamps were kind of a failure. Back when I was trying to make my own stamps, the game actually had a slightly different theme.
Hmm.
And this might come as a surprise to some people, but the game's theme was always about the ocean, but it used to be, and the first theme the game had was, and sort of also why the game is the way it is because it came out of this interest in the relationship, this like symbiotic relationship between algae and coral. And so, sort of this like mutualistic kind of growing is sort of where the inspiration of the mechanic came from. Like, I need you to grow and you need me to grow. But ultimately, in a game-based scenario, we are in competition, which is true in like nature too. Um, it's just that we happen to benefit one another in competing.
Oh, that's super neat. And speaking, I had to have a line of questions for the high tide, but obviously your process of creating the game, uh, using Blue Sky as the form of social media to put out kind of just different posts and threads and showing your work with the making trying to make the stamps and everything like that got you know people super interested in your game, and it sold out at the night market. How quickly? It was
I
almost
think in
instantaneous.
it was pretty much the moment I blinked. No, it was. I think it was less than 7 minutes for me to sell all my physical copies, and then less than 12 minutes to sell the rest of my bring your own pieces edition that I also brought.
Mhm.
So
Wow.
like I should actually explain that. So I had 20 copies that were all numbered. Um, you know, they were all numbered. They were also individually stamped and stickered. And so I sold through those boxes like pretty much immediately. After that, I had promised people wanted me because I really had planned to have all my work for the market done a month in advance because I know the way my brain works and the way that I put off work sometimes. It'll just stress me out to kind of be that close to the deadline. But having told people that I was ready a month in advance, people were like saying, make more. So I was like, oh man, I was kind of like wrestling with this idea of like, if I do more, that's like kind of back-breaking labor to do again. It's actually quite a lot. Because I don't spray paint each piece with just one layer of paint. I'm going over it multiple times, making sure that each side of each piece is properly covered with paint. and then stamped and then lacquered, on both sides. So it's for every individual piece, it's quite a lot of labor for one person. And then to also like take all those pieces and separate them into like different baggies along with like scoring tokens. It's actually like more of a production for an individual person than one might imagine if they're not used to thinking about games as a production process. Um, but uh, because I understood the desire that people have for a limited item, because like I myself don't want this game to be limited, but it's just a matter of like limitation of my own mind and body. I decided to try to figure out a solution that would allow me to basically just pay other people to figure it out for me. So I reached out to uh, Inkling, which is a Texas-based company that does screen printed cloth and clothing. And basically, they have their own Patreon that I became aware of on Blue Sky, where every month for like $5 a month, they will put out a new role playing game map. It's like system agnostic maps that they screen print. And so long as you're on their $5 a month Patreon, they'll just like send you these really nice, beautiful cloth maps that they design monthly. So it's sort of like Button Shy's wallet game of the month kind of project, but for purely like RPG maps. And it's really cool and impressive to see how quickly and how effectively like their output has been. And so I was so impressed when I received my first one that I reached out and I said like, "Hey, would you be interested in collaborating?" And then through collaborating with them, they have their own like on team artists who like help work with me to make sure that the board was exactly the way I wanted it. And so I was able to, under like from the span of, a month before the deadline of when we would be at the market, we were able to design and print, um, 30 additional copies effectively. We printed more like 50 of these cloth boards because we wanted to allow customers who bought like the physical box version to have the option of an add-on, and then 30 additional cloth boards that people can sort of include their own pieces and play. And so people would ask me like at the fair, like at the market, oh, like I could play this at home with just the board. And I was like, yeah. If you have checkers at home, if you have like any kind of thing, I've seen people use coins. I've seen people use like lug nuts and stuff. They've sent me like pictures. So people are pretty creative in like the kinds of pieces that they have lying around the house. So long as you have like three distinct types of pieces, and the board, you were able to play the game. Which to me felt really nice because I always want to be able to offer cheaper alternatives to my games. So it's like if you can't afford this, like I think I was charging $25 for the game itself and then $15 for the cloth board and a discount for people who bought both, obviously. But if you can't afford the $25 thing, you could just pay me $15 and you get a copy of the printed copy of the rules and a cloth board with no box and no pieces. So I think it was disappointing to some people to show up and be like, "Oh, you're out of stock, but you have this like, Plan B version of your game," and that kind of sucks to feel like it's like not the idealized version in their minds. But I think with a little bit of salesmanship, I was able to convince people that like this is actually a good idea. And so I was able to sell them out, which was cool. But it made me hungry to like want to get more copies in people's hands. Um, but before the market, actually, I had just been able to sign the game, which is another thing that kind of like helped me give hope to people who didn't have the opportunity to buy it at the market.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll ask about that in just a second too. But yeah, everything that you commented on there is super interesting and tying in some of the earlier elements and just kind of your initial thoughts on, the independent creator too. You know, there's like every single step of this had so much intentionality, from rule book to boxes to the amount of steps that each token for the game had, and then you know collaborating to get the cloth mat. And you mentioned that initially some people were kind of like you know bummed or whatever that the mat was not the full game. But on the other hand, if that mat didn't exist, then well, they wouldn't have had any opportunity whatsoever. And I've seen the game in its entirety, and every aspect of it is so like beautiful and reflects the craftsmanship and everything that went into it. And I don't know, I'm just definitely uh blown away, and it's fun hearing the stories of how that all came together too. And then just going into the what's next steps, you said before the market is when the game was signed, and I know that there is progress there, so I'm definitely just interested in hearing what's going on there.
Yeah, so for a year prior to like me working on High Tide, I was actually working freelance with a number of companies. Um, one of those being Underdog Games, which is most known for their trekking series, so trekking national parks, trekking the world. Um, in like January of last year, they hired me part time to help them develop their second edition of Trekking the World, which as our collaborations were just like going well, it just turned into more and more work with them. So they had me develop some elements of the third edition of Trekking the National Parks, along with like a solo mode for it, along with helping develop the expansion for that. I also developed and designed the solo mode for Trekking the World second edition that was on Kickstarter last year and also fulfilled last year. Um, and I also got the opportunity to like fully solo design the expansion for Trekking the World second edition, which was such a cool honor to feel like I gained the trust of this team over that last year. But by the end of the year, um, just when they were focusing on fulfilling their Kickstarter, it was becoming obvious that they just didn't have time to like keep assigning me jobs because they were just all so hands on deck with Kickstarter fulfillment, and they are a small team. And so they just had to say like, sorry, but we actually just can't afford to keep paying you part time when we can't. We don't we don't have work we can assign you specifically. Um, and so at the time, fortunately, I was able to supplement my work time with like other freelance jobs in addition to working at NYU as a there's my dog. There's my dog. Yeah, I told you that.
Here's that brief dog break, and unfortunately, any details about Marceline's dog cannot be heard, so they're chopped out. And now back to it.
Okay, let's go back to what we were actually talking about instead of talking about my dog and her barking.
From underdog to back to underdog.
Yeah. Back to underdog, yeah. Underback, top, underdog. Okay. So, uh, yeah, so there was this gap between when I was working for them and the night market, which, like I said, I was sort of filling in with other freelance work, but I suddenly had like a lot more time than I typically had within the year to just kind of like think and design. And so I ended up using that space to actually quite literally design all of High Tide within like a month or two. And so um, I do think that if I didn't have that time to like not think about underdog work just for like a month, High Tide wouldn't be the level of polished that I was able to make it, right? Um, that actually initially going into the night market, I planned to bring a trick taking game. It was actually originally going to be like a team based bluffing trick taking game, but I decided to pivot because my work on that game was not really sparking with me anymore by the time it came to like actually doing the work. And so once I had this time, I was just like messing around with pieces that were just around my studio. I happened to already have these like hex shaped pieces that I had painted in one set in black and one set in white. And I also had some ones that I had not painted. And so I was quite literally just playing around with pieces in my studio when I came upon the mechanism that High Tide currently like uses. So the actual like game design process was very fast, but the refinement process was very long.
Nice. Yeah, and honestly, just kind of sticking on with high tide a little bit. It seems, I mean, here I'll just from the description that it's a strategic stacking game for two players. Obviously, with the game being sold out in 7 minutes, I was not able to get a copy of it. But this is 100% the type of game that I play a lot of and am interested in. So can you just talk about, maybe some of the mechanisms there and kind of like just that design process of the game itself
Sure.
then?
Sure. In order to answer that, I first want to start with a tease about how BGG works and submitting games to BGG.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah.
when
Always
I
fun.
first submitted when I first submitted the game, I'm actually just going to open up this box because I want to remember what the first sentence in this rule book is. So in the book, I write under overview. High Tide is a cozy, strategic stacking game for two players. Try to cover your opponent's tiles and have the most uncovered tiles by the end of the game. So that was literally the description I submitted to BGG. And I don't remember who was talking to me at the time, but they were literally like, how is this a game? That's what they asked me. Like, is it literally just stacking things? Like, what are the rules? And I was like thinking to myself, like, do I really need to like do other game descriptions have that many details about like the actual mechanisms of the game? I thought it's usually just like a broad description. Um, and especially being a abstract game, I feel like these games in particular are in a more vulnerable position when you describe them to being simply just like um, someone just trying to make it at home or something. And like, I don't have a problem with that really. It's just that at the time, I kind of felt like this is something I'm trying to make exclusively by hand, and I'm not really ready to like start thinking about scale at that level yet. Um, and so, eventually I just like wrote that description that's currently on BGG. But it's funny to think that the game doesn't sound like a game at all. It's just like, okay, you stack pieces on top of other players' pieces. Is that it? And that is quite literally it. Um, it is a game where if you've played Hive, I think you'd be more familiar with like the kind of style of play. And the way I think I could best describe it is what if Hive was a game where you only had beetles? So the Beatles in Hive, and I have to say there was no part of this design process that had me turning to Hive for inspiration in particular. It just kind of came out of other people's sort of assigned experience seeing hexagons and telling me it looks like Hive. So I'm going to use Hive descriptors in a way that I think is more familiar to most people, but just know that like Hive was not at all kind of part of the process of designing this thing. There actually is another game that did inspire me. Sorry, I'm just going to pause real quick because I would like to look up the name of this game
Yeah.
um, just so I have it. Um, okay, I got it. Okay, so the game was actually inspired by this little Japanese game that came out in like 2013 by Taiki Shinzawa. Taiki Shinzawa is mostly known for his trick-taking game designs, but he also works on abstract games. And I owned one of his abstract games called Toppin. And basically, Toppin is a game where you have rectangles that are all the same color. The only difference is just they were stamped on the top red or black. And so if pieces were stacked, you didn't know what was underneath it. There was kind of a memory component. In addition, pieces can move up or down in this game, and the goal was simply to, at the end of the game, uh, be at the very top of the stack, because the way the mechanisms in that game work, it's inevitable that all the pieces will just be in one tall tower, and you just want to be on the very top of that tall tower. I thought this game was like interesting, but ultimately not very fulfilling. It felt like there weren't many like actual choices aside from like the first maybe two choices, and then everything sort of cascaded into itself. Um, in addition, I came to learn from this game that I don't really like abstracts where you can sort of take back moves. And I don't like abstracts where you have to rely on a memory component to know what is, especially if it's a stacking game, to know what is underneath a tile or a block or whatever. Uh, and so the solution that I felt was appropriate for this game was an adjustment of a single rule that ended up having a lot more impact than I realized. And the rule was just when a piece goes up, it cannot go down. So a piece in my game, High Tide, can only ever get moved up. And sort of like the inverse of playing Santorini, in Santorini, you can move up only one space vertically upward. So you can only move up sort of like a staircase rather than climb up a ladder, for example. Whereas in High Tide and in Santorini also, you have to jump up onto pieces like a staircase one after another, and then you can jump down from any height. In High Tide, it's sort of the inverse, where you can climb up any height that is adjacent to a piece, but you cannot drop down any height at all. And so what I liked about this mechanism, and also sort of as a criticism of Santorini, in addition, it felt like there are sometimes moves that don't make the game move forward. And so what I wanted was a game that was inevitable to end. Like this game will just end by the way the system works. And I wanted the game to be boardless, so it would just be flat on a table. And I wanted it to have more decisions than like a square shaped grid naturally has. So I happen to already have these hexagon shaped pieces because of another game that was actually just coincidentally also beach themed. I wanted these hexagons to be themselves like a shell, and that I was thinking I would like 3D print these pieces, and so I was using these hex tiles purely as a prototype. And I kind of wanted to make a version of like the shell game where you're like trying to hide information underneath these tiles. And what I quickly learned in that process is that by making a handmade product like that, it's really hard not to accidentally convey information that should be hidden, because it's really hard to make a perfect piece, like with no imperfections. Like each piece, the piece is slightly warped, just like from the way it was cut, or if it's the paint wasn't quite even on that one, or the way I just there are so many things that make it really difficult to do hidden information if I wanted to like turn these hex tiles into effectively cards that you can like lay out. So I knew that I wanted it to have like sort of like the game to just sort of be like no hidden information, just purely on the table. Another thing I really liked about Toppin was that because it's such a limited component game, you can literally take it anywhere with you, and it's like super lightweight. And because of my limitation of being the only one producing these games, and I knew that I wanted to try to make a game by hand rather than rely on print on demand, it was just such a naturally beneficial thing to like constrain myself to so few pieces. Originally, the game was even smaller than it currently is. So currently there's 19 pieces. There used to be 13 pieces. And the game was even just like more constrained in a way. And what I found was in testing that the game suffered from similar problems that I found in Toppin, which is the decision space is too narrow, and then it feels like the only decision you really make is the first turn, and then everything else is automated. And quite literally, that problem went away. Those kind of like comments went away as soon as I just made the grid larger. And so, as much as it pained me to make the decision to like spray paint and stamp and lacquer even more pieces for each individual box, it was ultimately the right decision, even though it was going to be more expensive for me to produce per box. Um, but yeah, I ultimately felt like the decision was right to make because it made for a better game, even though it meant more work and labor per game for me.
Yeah, my goodness, yeah, there's a lot of good to pull from that. I'm looking at the well, I mean, I've had the pictures up, but I'm looking at the pictures of the production and obviously hopping or making having to make that jump from 13 to 19 is going to add, six individually uh, painted and stamped and lacquered components per game that you had to make. But like you said, one of the goals being it's transportability and also with the tiles too. I mean, those like tile type of components are going to be nicer to be able to play, out on the beach at a park or kind of wherever it is. Has it still retains that awesome compact feeling to it, and just from the design elements that you were talking about too, I like the inevitability that you're talking about, just that every move you're making is one move closer towards the end, not kind of just that constant, back and forth or potentially inconsequential uh, decisions that you could make, or not inconsequential, but just, stalling or delaying or whatever that might be. And yeah, I am super excited that this is going to be getting a wider release. And honestly, now just talking about it and looking at it so much, I might try my hand at making some pieces just to start playing it even before then too, and then
Yeah,
ultimately
I
getting.
honestly am like, you should. I already got my advance, so I'm cool with people who want to just make the game. No, I'm just kidding. But uh, there was this guy, I think in France, you could see on the BGG page,
Mhm.
who made his own like laser etched pieces. He made it more like abstract by just putting like abstract shapes on the pieces. I don't know if you could see that now, but
Yep, yep, I have
it's
it up.
really beautiful. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, wow, there's something very powerful about the ability for people to make their own things, right? Like the fact that someone was interested enough in something that I made that it inspired them to create something that is both aesthetically beautiful the way I see it, and also just like touches. It's like in a way, um, my heart and this person's heart are like conjoining. Like we created something together, but like asynchronously. It's like very cool to feel like as a creative person, the impact of your creation um, impacts another. Like in the same way that I'm talking about like Max Seidman going on to make his own stamps for his game Skyline. Like that gave me that same feeling of like, wow, we are truly in community. Like this is what good creative community should be like, right? Where no matter how big or how small of an iteration or of a you know thing that someone goes on to make with something that you've done, you were a part of it, and in a way you're collaborating, and it's cool. It's a really cool feeling.
Yeah, that's a really interesting and beautiful sentiment to consider, and it's really tying into kind of like the overall ethos of a lot of the independent design. the hand creation and just personal care. And again, that's not to say that things that aren't created in this way are lacking that, but I don't know. It just definitely adds different wrinkles and elements to consider as well. And well, I've so many questions and so many thoughts, but that kind of is leading me to just a question for you. So you've done a lot of that contracted work through Underdog Games. You just started designing by having your solo mode for Ocean then as well. And here I'm going to kind of combine a couple of my thoughts here, but you know, just talking about your process right now, you've been doing a lot of designs. It seems like you're in a nice design wave, pardon the pun, of sorts, that you've just been, you know, making games, playtesting different things, and putting those experiences uh, like out and sharing them on social media, which again we'll kind of hop back into later a little bit. But I guess the question to start that bunch of random thoughts that I had was, what decisions are you contemplating in your designs when you're thinking about the different ways in which they could be published, whether that's, something that you want to, you know, like hand make for an indie market or, just publish and develop 100% independently or something that you want to pitch? Like what are some of the things that are going into your decision making there?
That's really interesting because I feel like I've been really fortunate in that like with High Tide, I went into it with the intention of making something entirely my own as a one-off and with the full expectation that there's no way that in like the year 2024 when it was that a abstract games will get signed by a company. Like I knew that the abstract game kind of like craze was sort of like going in a very particular like more like mass friendly direction. And I'm not meaning to like call out any game in particular, but I think that what is often expected from publishers of abstract games is that sense of like easy to learn, hard to master being like more important than everything else. And to me, it's like there are some incredible abstract games that just need a little bit more thought and care and time put into them in terms of play patterns. Like you can't just play a game one time and expect it to be really enjoyable on that first game, but like sort of sit with it and think with it. Um, like something that I'm trying to get back into uh, is backgammon. Like backgammon, and I'm also playing a lot of gin rummy right now. Like playing these classic games and trying to figure out like why they're great, because like maybe on their surface they're like very like austere. I think I'm using that word correct. Like they're very like hard to breach. They kind of just seem antiquated. When you play them, they like feel very like good. Like there's something about each rule in these games that just feels correct. And even though there's like sometimes a weird rule in a game that is like an old card game that's like, why does that exist? Oh, well, it's a card game rule. It's like those rules exist because they facilitate a kind of play pattern that is the most enjoyable version of that game. So it's like in Gin Rummy, there's this excellent mechanic that I love called knocking, and it's also available. It's also available, also featured in another game I love called Blitz, or sometimes called 31,
Mm.
where when you knock on the table, you're signaling to the other person, because Gin Rummy is a two-player game. You're signaling to the other person that I'm ready to go out. You have one more turn to build up your hand and try to score effectively fewer points than me at the end of the hand. Because the way Gin Rummy works is effectively every card in your hand is negative points. So it's basically like the Uwe Rosenberg game style of like starting with a bunch of negative points and trying to work your way towards zero. And so, or ideally higher than zero. And so the way you do that is by creating pairs, not pairs, sorry, triplets of the same number, or runs of 3 cards, a run being like 3 sequential numbers in the same suit. And so by creating these sets and runs, you're canceling out cards in your hand, reducing them from negative points to zero. And so the goal of the game is to be the first person to have 0 points in your hand. And many rummy style games are very strict about getting to zero. It's like you can't go out in the game. Going out means revealing your whole hand until you hit 0 points in your hand. But what Gin Rummy does so well is have this knocking mechanism. And what knocking is I'm signaling to you that I'm going to go out. I still have points in my hand, but I bet that the points in my hand are less than the points that you'll have in your hand after one more turn. We'll see, like, I think a very popular version of this game mechanism is now seen in like Sea Salt and Paper, which is sort of a derivative of Koi Koi, which also has a mechanism like this. In the Hanafuda game Koi Koi, and in Korea there's a similar game called Go Stop. There's a mechanism where you can either go or you can stop when you're ready to go out. And if you say go, you're potentially going to get even more points. Whereas if you stop, you're saying, I'm just going to keep the points I have. There's like a risk-taking mechanism built into the game. But with Gin Rummy, it's just simply taking a bet against the other person. If the other person is able to effectively deny you by having fewer points in their hand, there's a penalty involved. And forget what the penalty exactly is because it's been a minute since that's actually happened in one of our games. Usually, my partner and I have gotten pretty good at Gin Rummy that we take safer bets these days. We know the structure of the game well enough to not make mistakes like betting too early. But in the same way, if people are familiar with Marvel Snap has the snapping mechanic that is its like main feature. That is like if you snap, you are saying you're making a claim that you think that you can win the game. And depending on how early you snap, you get more points for winning that game than if you hadn't snapped earlier in the game. So effectively, the earlier you can anticipate yourself winning, the more points you earn. The opponent can also snap, or counter snap in a way, saying, you think you can beat me? I know I can beat you, right? And this is a mechanism that's based on, speaking of backgammon from earlier, the doubling cube, right? I literally just learned recently about how to actually use the doubling cube, which, I just feel like it's such a, when you start to look back into the history of these old games, you start to see through the matrix in a way and like recognize design patterns in games that are like incredible. And so I feel like it's really worthwhile to like look back at old card games and old board games, not like Monopoly. Maybe there's still stuff there you can, pull for inspiration, like Machikoro has done. I think Machikoro is like one of the best versions of that kind of like dice inspired kind of mechanism. But um, but I feel like, this idea of making a bet, of bluffing, of like they come up so much in card games. And most recently, I was posting about my exploration into a game called GOPS, which is short for the greatest, the game of pure strategy. And the way the game works is we will effectively simultaneously reveal a card to try to earn. So you split every player gets ownership of a single suit in a standard deck. So I will get all the hearts, you'll get all the clubs. If it's just me and you, that'll be it. And then we make a separate deck of just the diamonds, let's say. Uh, we reveal a diamond, and that is like the score card we are competing for. We choose a card from our hand, which and then you reveal it simultaneously, and whoever's number is higher earns that scorecard. And as I was like thinking about this game, because right now I'm working with Underdog to like produce a bunch of like different card games, and so I'm doing like a lot of research in this vein of like different card game mechanisms that are really cool or not typically used. Um, and so I'm like thinking and researching a lot through card games. And so looking at GOPS, I'm thinking, oh, what if GOPS was turn based? Okay, cool. That's kind of like an auction. Okay, what if it's an auction where you don't want to win, so you're trying to play the lowest possible thing to kind of like make the other person win? Or what if it's GOPS that's turn based, but when I play a card, you can't play a card of the same number. Wait, that's just an auction. So it's like there's these things that like I'm connecting with by doing the research of like these older games and kind of connecting them to the design world we just like live in and have lived in. Because where I wound up in that research of like, oh, what could a turn-based GOPS game be like, was effectively like a proto version of High Society by Reiner Knizia. So it's like, to me, I feel like by discovering that in a way, by forming that kind of connection in my brain, even though I might not move forward with that design, it makes me trust my instincts and also the process that I'm going through to create and discover and put together connections um, between mechanisms that are logical and also have been proven, right? Um, in a way, um, people, modern game designers, we're often looking at the games that are coming out now, and I don't think that we think too terribly much about what those things were based on before. I think it's really easy to like look at every game that comes out and think of it as um like its own mountain that just needs to be climbed and understood. But in reality, every game that comes out is an iteration of something else. And if you lived in that period when that game came out, maybe it's easier to put the connections together of maybe what that person at that time was thinking of. Um, but at the same time, uh, you know, if you don't know how to research, if you don't think in that research mentality, you wouldn't know how to find it. But right now I am in that research mentality. I'm very invigorated to like look into old card games. And what I'm discovering is like not only like games that I used to play as a kid or like mechanisms tertiary to games that I used to play as a kid. Um, but I just feel like it's fun to make these kinds of connections and sort of see reflections of the designers that I really like and respect and kind of humanize them more into like thinking that the things that they create um, were inspired by the world around them and not just purely games. Obviously, like there are ways to find inspiration that in things that are not just games, but um, mechanisms are just built upon a collective consciousness of what we're familiar with, who we are at the time that we make them. And if we look back into the past, it becomes easier to form and understand those connections that other people have made.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that is all like beyond super fascinating and yeah, I don't know. I mean, the way you uh, discussed your thought process and this invigoration of research and making those design connections. I mean, you said it much more eloquently than I could recap it. I was like enthralled. And I just think it's kind of funny too. A couple of interesting connections. You mentioned, your play and examination of backgammon a little, and it, at the beginning of the episode, I you mentioned your your interview with Liz Davidson, and it looks like Liz has been playing backgammon a lot lately too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I was inspired by Liz to start thinking about backgammon, actually, for sure. I actually haven't told her.
Okay.
Um, so I would like to tell her maybe before this podcast comes out, but I have been thinking more about backgammon ever since she mentioned it. Because it is such an interesting game in that it does so many things that might seem backwards if it were to be designed today, you know? But it's so modern, you know? It's like like maybe on its surface it might seem like a roll and move game, but it's like no, you make the decision after the roll, which is a much more modern concept. So I think that there's still like a lot of freshness, I think, in playing it today.
Yeah, and yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's wild. I don't know. My brain is thinking in 50 different spots right now, and I know if I'm not mistaken, this is a show that I watched forever ago, but you know, I think in the show Lost, the
I love Lost. I love
the
Lost, I have to
the
say.
the characters played backgammon. That was the game, right? It was
Hmm.
like Michael
Yeah,
or
there are
Walter.
two sides. One is white and one is black.
Yeah. Huh.
I think yeah, like Michael plays it. I think Locke plays it. I think Michael is Michael the kid? No, Walt is the
Walt is the
kid.
kid, Michael's the father.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, I don't know if like all, I think again, I forgot the storyline. It's been such a long time, but I think eventually there were scenes of Locke playing it with Walt, and I don't know if that just fueled the kind of conflict between him and Michael. I don't know. But nonetheless, it's just one of those things too that's, has this, cultural significance and just has, survived. And I know nothing about backgammon, but you mentioned the doubling cube and and all of my kind of questions here have, follow-up thoughts, but I have one written on the document where I literally just wrote Marvel Snap question mark. And the fact that you brought that up, and I honestly probably wasn't even going to bring it up, but I knew just from following you that you have interest in that game, and that I maybe in a future episode we can fall down some Marvel Snap rabbit holes, but
Yeah,
I
we'll bring a round table of Marvel Snap likers to
oh
talk about Marvel Snap.
yeah, I that could be something. I would need to venture back because I played so much of that game, and I had to force myself self to stop. So I've been away for a while, but it is crazy thinking about that game in conversation. And you mentioned just the double down method, and once you put it out there that you think you're going to win, if you get snapped back and the initial snap was a bluff, well, you could be pretty screwed, or or just hope for dear life that something works out. But
Yeah, like after thinking through this more recently, I'm thinking like, would high tide benefit from a snap mechanism? Would it benefit from a doubling cube mechanism? Um, and maybe it would, but obviously, I can't really throw that at the publisher right now. I think that they would be mad at me.
just
Um, but it's the kind of thing that I think gives depth to a otherwise very simple game. And maybe when the game is published, people can kind of fiddle around with a snapping mechanism in this game. I would love to see what people think through.
I mean, it could always be in a next version, a nice little expansion. Who knows?
Yeah, we give you a doubling seashell carved on an actual shell.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I, you know, like the way that you've worked through all of these different, design considerations, philosophies, things that you are researching and incorporating in your design, I mean, well, first off, there's so much more that we could talk about with just those particular things, and I have other things too. But at this point, just for the sake of your time, and I have one one thing already set for you before getting to the wrap up set of questions, which is always two. I don't want to make you have to be stuck chatting with me for like 3 hours or something.
I'm enjoying our chat. You want
Oh,
to know
I
what? This chat is great. I feel like one, you're really easy to talk to. Two, you're I think you're a great listener because I'm a very great talker. I love to talk, and I'm happy to have an audience to talk to. I feel like there are kinds of people that I connect really well with that are like just as chatty as me, and we're just chatting over each other, and we're just so excited, and we're feeding off each other's energy. But I also really respect like the level of like care that you put into like listening and observing and absorbing.
well, two things. I really appreciate that, but on the flip side, for me, it's just, especially in my mind for this venture, it's almost like easy, like that's for me. That is the point of doing this, is just being able to hear, you know, different people in kind of like the board game, like hobby space, quote unquote, and even just with like what I want from the show in general. Like I don't want it to be just limited to board games too, and seeing like in ways I can venture out. But the short of it is that I just love hearing people's stories, and I think like through the stories that wind up like coming out, it just adds so much depth to a game, and I want like people to be able to, and I know that there are a lot of, well, not a lot. I know that there are people who listen and then will look into different designers or artists more or whatever, and then if they do that based on the show, then they have this alternate like experience, or they just have extra context, which I think context adds so much, and then really falls in
Right.
line with a lot of that kind of independent creation that you've been talking about so much. But
I think your podcast is sort of like the DVD extras of game design commentary. Like it's what's cool about this conversation is it does feel like something that would belong on, yeah, like a DVD, the director's cut, maybe commentary.
You know what? I'm gonna write that down, and if I need to start like branding or coming up with like catchphrases to
Right,
keep getting
right.
people, I'm stealing it.
Yeah, when you eventually make a memoir of this, you just put that on the inside jacket.
Oh, I like that. But speaking okay, I don't know. Again, I think I listen well, but my brain just gets pulled into so many like different lines of the conversation. But one of the things that we've kind of brought up, it's been touched at in different ways at different times, is just what I we kind of talked about before too, is that to me, following you on uh, Blue Sky and seeing the things that you're working through, it almost has a living designer diary-ish feel to me, and I just you know like love following what you're saying there, not just in the board game space, but you're creating, calls for justice, raising awareness, and then when it comes to the hobby space, you're creating very thoughtful threads, promoting and encouraging indie designs, asking designers to think about who they're designing for, and just a wide variety of posts that makes me get to experience the gamut of thoughts and emotions regarding game design and life, and thinking about things to have in this conversation too. So first off, I just wanted to say thank you for doing that. I know that uh, social media can be like a tough place to put things out there on, and I think what you're posting is, well, I know, not think, I know what you're posting is just very important and impactful. And I just kind of want to ask you if you have any other, uh, you know, thoughts regarding your processes there.
Yeah, I think when I approach social media, I think that I used to be really scared of using it. Like before getting into game design, I feel like I did not always have positive experiences on social media to the degree that I really wanted to like be an active member of something. But genuinely, like just from all the positive reactions I've gotten from even the first thing I ever tried making in game design with oceans, um, posting about oceans for the first time, having this like I've told this story in the past and I've written a designer diary about oceans, so I won't take up too much of our time with it. But I had this eureka moment which led me to working on oceans with North Star Games in an official capacity. Um, and that was the first tweet I ever sent that went to my degree of virality. Like, I think I got like 80 or I don't know, between 80 and 150 likes on a post. And that was crazy to me. That was like, wow, I guess people are reacting to something. And I guess I'm doing something right enough that it's telling me that I should keep going. Um, and I also should say, yeah, I don't want to veer too far away from the social media stuff. So, the thing that I try to do the most on social media is kind of like be as authentic to uh, uh, about myself as possible. Like, I don't want to put my whole heart out there, but in some ways, I can't help who I am. Like, I care so much that it could be like overwhelming, you know? I think when it comes to sharing my feelings, I feel like in some ways it's very important that people see me as human, um, that people see me as caring, thoughtful. I think those are all things that I care about people thinking of me as. Um, and I never wanted to be in the position of like, I think I was always self conscious of being in the position of being someone who calls out like what I think of are as like failed acts of social justice or reform within our space, where it's like, how could we have this little foresight, you know? Um, so when I post about things, I feel like to me it's obvious. Um, the things that I post, I feel like these are obvious things to me. But what it took me a long time to realize is that it's not obvious to everyone. What I think and feel inside is not obvious to everyone else because I have my own experience with the world. I have my own perspective of the world. And once I realized that, it actually unlocked something in me that I actually do have something to share. And it is worth listening to. It is worth replying to and having a conversation with other people about because every individual actually has that, not just me. It's just that I think something in me was like awakened to the possibility that I could have something to say. Um, and so once I got over that kind of fear and realized that there are things that are obvious to me that are not obvious to other people, I realized I started to think having just like a lot more empathy for people's lack of information. And so what I started to do from then on is kind of provide information. Like I wanted people to feel like I don't know that like genuinely I feel like I don't when I think about what I know, I feel like I always tell myself that I don't know enough, you know? I always think of myself as someone who's always learning, always growing, always curious. And so when I see the lack of care, the lack of curiosity, the lack of um when I see a lack, I can't help but call it out. It upsets me. I feel like, we should be more mindful of, the kinds of culture that we're accepting into our lives, right? As an industry, if a company only takes, this was probably like one of the first hot takes I had that I've started to pick up steam, but like, how could it be that a publisher only takes pitches through Facebook or only announces when they're taking pitches through Facebook? Um, there are so many types of people, not just trans people, who are afraid of using Facebook, especially right now. Like literally right now, people might want not to use meta platforms, right? Might not want to use Instagram, might not want to use Facebook, for their own personal reasons. And so for a publisher to kind of make this sort of like, it's not, I don't think it's always intentional. Sometimes it just comes from a place of ignorance or convenience, but it is involuntarily creating a dynamic that services a certain type of designer more than others. And when I say a certain type, I do mean to heavily imply white people, cis people, male people, and like that is not going to stop unless we look at it and think about what we're doing as a system. Because like when I'm working on games, I think many game designers will find that and would agree that when you start working on games, you start thinking about systems much more clearly. And it's so clear to me that the system of publishers and designers does not work. It's like it is so to me um like unclear to so many people, like where to go, where to start, how to feel like a professional person. And in some ways, if you don't, it's kind of the problem with if you grew up without wealth, right? You People can tell when you grew up without wealth versus when you grew up with wealth from the way you act. If you don't if you don't make your systems accessible for like how to pitch, or and this is not the only problem in the world, but I'm this is just one example. I'm just trying to like hone the conversation around, because it actually just relates to so many other things that are not just this alone. But if you only close off your the space to one type of person, you have to think about all the people that don't have access to that space. And I tried, and I'm currently trying to be involved in the indie game night market scene, or like just the night market scene in general, to remind people that, you know, we need to figure out systems that mean that people can come up with really cool, innovative ideas that don't require them to print a lot or spend a lot of money, or um, encourage people of different economic backgrounds, different races, different, you know, backgrounds, just to make things and feel encouraged to make things, even if it's their first time, because that's what is so great about those spaces. But a publisher, which in my view has like really just to open the doors, and designers will come to them. I understand it could be overwhelming to like receive so many offers for publication, but the truth is that the more limited you have your pitch process be, the more selective your group of people that just simply know culturally where to go and what to do is going to be more, yeah, like I said, selective. And right now in the world we live in, that selective group is more male and more white than anything else. And so I feel like then it's just a failure, right? We need to do something, we need to say something. And if we don't do or say something, then it's just going to keep happening. And I hate to be a problem child. I hate to step up on a soapbox and feel like everyone's looking at me or might not want to work with me for the way I talk. Um, but at the same time, I might not want to work with them if they don't like the way I talk, you know? So it's like this cyclical thing where um, if me being trans or me having opinions uh, is a barrier, if it somehow impacts the way that I can work on and sell my games, then yes, that would be a problem for me. But right now, that isn't the problem. And I think what's more important is calling out the problem.
100. I cannot again, it's like many of your responses, I cannot say what you said in the way you said it, but I can just express like my gratitude and it, I don't just kind of taking a couple of those things. It doesn't feel, you know, so boxy, but I think, things that you mentioned to you, these are, like obvious. These are things based on your experiences, what you're seeing, and, you know, as and this extends back to that thank you. I mean, whatever like you can do, I mean, you really are putting yourself like out there in the way that you are commenting on these like extremely real issues and whether it is due to, like ignorance or nefarious
Negligence,
yeah,
maybe.
negligence or like whatever it is, like I you know more people need to understand the systems and I bringing awareness to that is always going to be a good thing and awareness and hopefully having more people do what they can to like join in those efforts and also to see what can be done. Like I don't know.
I think game
I'm
designers in particular are really good at like thinking in terms of systems because really it's just a muscle you need to learn. And a social system is also just like a closed system you could think of like a game, right? So I think that if we start thinking about the unequal distribution between quote unquote players in this field, um, maybe we can think about how to balance the game better, right? How to balance the world better.
yeah, I you can hope, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I think maybe it just helps to sort of like think in those ways of, you know, knowing that because when we design games, we're designing and fixing and balancing on such a micro scale. You know, the idea that it could be done on a larger scale is overwhelming. But I think in some ways, even if I'm not the most knowledgeable person to know the answers to how to solve those problems, um, I think what I can do is be the person who points out that there are problems and maybe try to explain where the problems are and how they impact, right? Because sometimes people might be able to acknowledge that there's a problem but not understand it, right? So I think I really like empathize with that lack of understanding, but not lack of care, right? I do care, but I don't understand.
Yeah, yeah, and it is really kind of interesting too because I think there are like games that will either approach various social issues in different scales like micro or macro, but then just kind of that like meta analysis from the people in the hobby experiencing these things and thinking about how it might affect all the people who are involved in the kind of production and publication of these products in the first place. I don't know. There's a lot, and I it is not my area of expertise, and I just want to like reiterate as much as I can, like my appreciation for you, like working through them and making them available for literally anybody who wants to check them out. So
Yeah, I really appreciate your acknowledgement because it's funny because it while it is work and like it does take energy from me, I feel like maybe there's just a part of me in my gut that just feels like it's important to say. That's I think why I do it. And that's also maybe just why, there's some part of me that just wants to work on and make great games too. Like it feels like it comes out of a part of my gut that wills it into existence. Like these are not concepts that are like purely my own, but in some ways, like the creative spirit is like guiding me to feeling and believing in a certain way, right? Like it's all philosophically related back to games for me. where it's like, okay, I can understand this maybe because I'm thinking of it because of the training I've done to my brain over the past several years. Um, and I think it's fair to accept that not everyone has the time or the energy to put into thinking of systems and thinking within systems and thinking creatively. Um, just because of the world we live in, it's exhausting and overwhelming, and people don't have time. You know, they have families, they have priorities, and it can be easy to have those things that are actually very quite important to our world to slip through the cracks of like what you have time for. So yeah, I do want to acknowledge that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's again, so many like just like awesome thoughts wrapped up in those sentiments. But I'm don't want to like 180 on you, but I kind of want to transition that to the two like typical wrap up questions. And I think the last point that you were talking about when you're just like acknowledging, maybe not some of maybe some of the things that people don't deem as necessary, like the art they consume, the games that they play, these things that make us who we are and kind of like seep into us and our core and help us create on our own too. My penultimate question is what's like something like a text that's been on your mind, whether it's something you've been reading, playing, watching, or listening to that has kind of been, like I said, stuck on your mind that's been living with you in the recent past.
Hmm. I read a lot of fiction. I don't read a ton of nonfiction.
Mhm.
So I know you're using the term texts to mean like any form of media,
Yes.
but I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna take it literally, just because I feel like it. Um, the the books I've been really enjoying lately are by Brandon Sanderson. You know, I feel like as a young teenager, I was always afraid of reading these enormous, gigantic fantasy novels, but I actually recently discovered that I actually do find the convenience of an e-reader easier to like just pick up and read in at nighttime or on the subway or whatever. So it's actually been really nice and encouraging to read in that format. Um, the books that I think are worth looking at by him are um, Mistborn, I think is like just an excellent series. And you know, I was just thinking about recently, I was listening to some talks Brandon Sanderson does on YouTube. He puts out like some of his like professor level talks, I think for free for some of his classes. And one of the most recent things that I was listening to of his was because I do absorb a lot of text through audio, through podcasts, through you know reading on my ebook. But one of the things that Brandon Sanderson was saying was you have to think about the promise that your book is giving to the reader tonally and narratively at the start. And so, like, you know, Mistborn from the start promises kind of like a pretty dark world, but with pretty interesting characters. It establishes like race dynamics in a way, and it kind of prepares your mind for the story that you're about to read for like 500 more pages after after the prelude. Um, but it also gives you a hint of the kind of like magic system that exists in that world. Because the way Brandon Sanderson's books always work is there's a unique magic system inspired by some property of Stein. And I think that he is just really good at finding these really like compelling magic systems. For Mistborn, um, shout out to the Mistborn board game that recently came out. I've not yet tried it, but I would really like to, by John D. Clare. Um, it is about like ingesting these vials of metals. And so metals are injected by the magic user and burned, quote unquote, burned. in their stomach on command in order to produce magic. So each metal has a different kind of magical effect. Um, well, maybe I shouldn't even explain the magic system. People should just look into the book themselves. But the thing that I was most captivated by was that the promise, right? When someone looks at a game on a table, when someone looks through the rule book at pieces, it should immediately convey how simple, how complicated, how interactive, how like everything about this game, the way it looks should convey the kind of experience that you want them, the players, to have. Because um, Bonanza has some of the ugliest art in the entire world, but it is the most appropriate art for that game and makes the game better. So when I compare Bonanza to the version that came out, I think like 1 or 2 years ago called Dahlias, um, it just doesn't compare because in one game you're trading silly humanoid beings that are gross and weird, and in the other one you're just trading flowers, and it just kind of lacks that same kind of silliness, same character that I think is evocative of the play style of the game. So it's not just it's not just purely art. Obviously, it's how the game is set up on the table, how the game is felt in the hand. Um, I forget where I learned this, but Neil Hova told me that there are like 3 to 4 main fields of play. There's like those in your hand, there's like private information, those in the middle of the table, maybe a player board, like your own unique player board right in front of you. Um, I would say those are like the 3 main spheres, right? Um, and you need to think about the relationship between each of these 3 or 4, in some cases, spaces. Who has access to which of those spaces? Um, how is that portraying the kind of game that you're playing? How can you reduce the number of spaces within the game in order to lower complexity, or at least the interpretation of complexity, right? Because sometimes, most often, games are more simpler than they allow themselves to be or convey themselves to be. And with better product design, you can take a complicated game and make it look super simple and easy and colorful, right? Um, I think about the estates, because the estates, uh, which came out from Capstone, I don't know if they still publish it, but that is a really cutthroat game and looks so attractive. I could also point to the game Bus um, by Splatterspellen. They made this incredibly, like, especially the new Capstone version. I keep calling it Capstone, I guess. They're very colorful, beautiful production that are flat with color where they need to be and busy with color where they can be, you know? So it just kind of gives this very full, exciting thing that you can't wait to like just touch and play. And also just reads simply and clearly and cleanly. I've been thinking a lot about like card games and talking about card games and abstract games, but um, I think that when you think about the game you want to make, you have to think about the promise that you're making from turn one.
Yeah, that's that's perfect. Well, first off, you're making me think about game design in ways that I probably should be thinking about it more, but also reminding me that Brandon Sanderson is definitely on my to read list as well. And and yeah, so kind of thinking about like creating games and what it is that you're trying to do and how the games can present themselves, to the players and those types of promises and communication that are being made early on. We've talked a bit about high tide, and that is going to get that is going to be published by Underdog Games. That is something that's coming out for people to look out for from you. You also have an announced game from Button Shy Games called Phantasmic. So my last question for you would just be, what are some like other things, potentially some other things that you've been working on and want to shout out here for people to look out for, maybe in some of those previous solo modes if they're getting released or delivered. I don't know the timelines. Just kind of things
Sure.
that you want to shout out.
Sure. I will say that I have a lot of um, things cooking that are now out of my hands from multiple places. So it's hard to know precisely what I'm allowed to say.
Well,
Some of these things do have
don't
NDAs.
overshare then, all right?
Yeah,
Don't worry
yeah,
about
yeah.
that.
But I will say, just look forward to me shouting from the rooftops about each one of these projects I'm really excited about. One is a social deduction game. Um, One I did development on a roll and write, which with a designer that I'm really excited about having developed one of their games. Um, and yeah, I'm also just working on a ton of card games right now. I'm in talks with a bunch of different spaces for like where those card games can go. I recently designed like a speed-based um, pattern building game that I'm really excited about. That was recently rejected by Underdog, so I'm going to be trying to pitch it in the next year, as far as like maybe where publishers that are not Underdog might be interested in this. Just because it being block based, they weren't sure how to market it, or I don't know. It was more of the marketing problem around this particular game for them as a company. So I know that it's a great game. It's just a matter of finding the right home. Uh, there's also, yeah, I've been doing a lot of work on this. I'm working on like a gin rummy inspired game that is meant to be like for casual audiences. It's meant to be like gin rummy, but scales up to 7 players. And scales appropriately up to 7 players. It's very hard to scale a two-player game, but I think I'm achieving something here. Um, I recently came upon a new card game mechanism that I'm really excited to start sharing with people. I posted a little teaser about it on my Blue Sky recently. It's just like a pure numbers on cards game um, with no suits, and it's like a hand shedding game. And I'm really excited to keep working on it and kind of like talk more about that in the future. Um, but other than that, yeah, I just have a lot going on.
Well, I think that is the kind of the perfect transition out for now because I'm beyond appreciative that you know took time out of all this design work that you've been doing and sharing like all of your thought processes about that here. Well, not all, but there's so many things that this conversation has me thinking about and considering, and just extremely excited to look out for the games that are announced that are going to be coming out, and all these other ones that will be announced at the correct time, and me not making you break NDAs and all that too. But yeah, I couldn't be more appreciative that you spent all of this time with me here, and I look forward to like staying in contact and hopefully doing this again in the future. That was fantastic.
Yeah, that would be so fun to come back on. But yeah, I've been having a great time. And honestly, if this wasn't a podcast, I would say like, yeah, we could just keep talking for another hour because I literally just do not tire. Um, so, but yeah, alas, we do have busy schedules. So I do appreciate you having me on and inviting me on, and also just getting to talk with you more since meeting you at PAX Unplugged.
Yes, yeah, it's super cool just being able to have met and seeing that success that you have there, all these other successes that are going on, and it just links to some of the things that you're talking about with community. Yeah, like I said, I don't know. I couldn't be more excited to see all the work you're doing whenever I'm, you know, stuck on whatever creative project I'm working on. It's so nice just to like see people making and being positive and being successful. Like, I don't know. I love it. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. That's very sweet, Ryan. And if you ever want to chat about design, feel free to hit me up.
Yeah, well, you opened up a can of worms, but I'll
Oh
take you up on
no.
that.
No, I literally am somebody who unfortunately lacks a lot of boundaries when it comes to just like talking about design. Like in a way, coming onto podcast this casual and this nice with like just really nice to like kind of rummage through the ideas and the thoughts that I've had in the past year as a working designer. So it's just been really fun.
Yeah, again, thank you so much. And now we will be able to continue some design discussions in the future too. So,
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
Intertextual Cardboard Experience, the most semi-diurnal podcast about board games and any other text that they connect to. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time here. Any further support, such as sharing the show with friends, following the page's socials in the episode description, writing a review, filling out the feedback form, or doing anything else you can think of is greatly appreciated. Keep playing, watching, reading, listening, experiencing.